Hey everyone, I want to make this video today on what my criteria is for selecting long-term stocks. Seeing a couple red days this past week with some speculative picks and in the past few months with the vaccine and the election, it just makes you think that sometimes you have to think about the bigger picture. Sometimes you have to think about what are the plays that I'm not jumping in and out of, but I really believe in long term. And no matter how red the days are, no matter how much money I'm losing, I have a pretty strong price target long term in my head. And so I want to go through a couple of those companies with you, as you'll see throughout. Hopefully it'll give you some ideas, and I'll go through my 4 criteria for picking them. So I have 4 criteria. Before I jump into it, I just want to say, as always, I'm not a financial advisor. Everything I say here is just how I approach things, and you can absorb that information as you will. So first of the 4 criteria is durability slash brand. Now, this goes back to what Warren Buffett always says about why he purchased the company Wrigley, which makes a chewing gum, because he basically said, I don't care what happens in the world. I may not have known much about the internet or technology, but I don't care what happens. No one's going to stop chewing gum. And the way I feel about brand and durability is that there are certain companies that no matter what happens in the world, it's hard to see them ceasing to exist. I list a couple of those being Disney, Coca-Cola, and Ford. And the amazing thing about brand is you don't even have to think about product per se, right? Coca-Cola makes soda, Ford makes cars. But these days, it's not even clear all the time what Disney's making. I mean, they make an experience, they make merchandise, they have streaming services. But what allows them to do that is the strength of their brand throughout the years. And obviously, we saw a challenging time for Disney this year with the COVID virus, with Disney World and all those experiences. But because their brand was able to get them through it with their other products and services in a way other companies weren't. And no matter what happens, the same way Warren Buffett said that thing about chewing gum, I just can't see Mickey Mouse going out of existence. And it sounds silly, but something as simple as that is what keeps a brand alive. Like, just thinking into future generations, no kid is going to come into this world not knowing what Mickey Mouse is. And obviously Disney at this point has so much more than that. No brand is going to go into the future with, not associating Coke, aside from the drug, with a soda, which many others might refer to as a drug, which is actually something I'll get into. No generation is going to go into the future not thinking about the founder of cars, so to speak, being Ford. And there's a huge amount of power to that is stronger than a lot of the other factors that I'm going to get into. So another aspect of durability is innovation. Obviously, we're in a fast-changing world. We're seeing the way retail companies, airlines are suffering with new circumstances. Things like Blockbuster came out of fashion with things like Netflix. So we have to think about changing circumstance, changing innovation, and what are companies that are both going to outlast that change in innovation and going to ride that wave, be part of it, and be spearheading it. So here are a couple over here. Reason I say Amazon and Apple is because these are all companies that started obviously with the birth of the internet along those lines, but the internet's changed so much since then, and they've adapted with it a tremendous amount and only become stronger because of it. And seeing that with companies like Apple and Amazon, that gives me a lot of faith that they can overcome anything in the future, including a decentralized crypto type universe where we not only possibly have something like Bitcoin, but we also have a decentralized space like certain web browsers, basically virtual parallel experiences to Amazon and Apple that people might prefer because they're decentralized. I'd like to see how Amazon and Apple react to those, and that does worry me about them. And if you don't know much about Bitcoin or crypto, this is something to look into. I can't really explain it right now. But the point is, though, that Amazon and Apple have adapted to technology changes in the past, so it gives me some semblance of hope for the future. Similarly with Facebook, Facebook's obviously huge in the 2000s, but you have other things that came along like Instagram, which Facebook obviously bought, Snapchat, Twitter, Vine, now TikTok. Facebook in a way seems very antiquated, right? Like if you think about Facebook, it's not the most popular social media anymore, per se. It's mostly like old people, people's parents getting in arguments on there. So how is Facebook still thriving? That's something I'm going to get into, but it did outlast that innovation of social media, which it was part of spearheading. And will it be part of the innovation? Yeah, Amazon obviously is. It keeps reinventing. Apple always finds a new way to keep people hooked on their phones. Zoom, I'm just putting that in here because the pandemic showed room for other types of innovation, right? The ways we might have to communicate with each other in the future. And then this pandemic also made us think about certain companies. Are they able to last disasters? I put Uber here. I mean, like with many other companies throughout the year, it tanked during the pandemic. But what I really like about Uber is, and what makes me really feel really safe with it no matter what happens with the pandemic, is its versatility. The fact that it's not only a driving service, something people are scared to get in maybe at the beginning of a pandemic, but it's also a food delivery service, which is something that thrived more than ever during the pandemic because people didn't want to leave their homes. They wanted their food delivered to them. So Uber really set itself up in a position very, very adeptly with this pandemic where, well, it was well prepared, even if unintentionally so, where if people are too scared to get in their cars, they'll bring a product to you and you don't have to leave your home. So that's the sort of thing to be thinking about. And I've heard people say that some of the best long-standing, highest profiting products are ones that are addictive. Things like Apple's iPhones, Coca-Cola, the sugar industry, Netflix, just the phenomenon of binge watching something, Facebook, social media. You know, these aren't necessarily healthy things and not necessarily things I endorse, but the reality is, you know, we all have addictive traits in us. These are the type of companies that are going to flourish. So moving on to the next slide is something like I'm going to refer to as ethics. This may not seem like the biggest deal, right? Like every company is unethical to an extent. When you get to a certain size, you're going to have unethical aspects to you. But you really have to think into the future and think about all the social movements that have been going on and how they're going to affect companies, affect their stocks, if they're going to put them out of business, if they're going to make them non-fashionable, right? It's hard to imagine something like Apple going to the ground. But I want to play quickly a speech for you from Ricky Gervais at the Golden Globe to give you the kind of sense of how people can come and protest Apple, boycott Apple, and make it a lot harder for them to make their products in the way they do.
Apple roared into the TV game with a morning show, a superb drama, a superb drama about the importance of dignity and doing the right thing, made by a company that runs sweatshops in China. So, well, you say you're woke, but the companies you work for, I mean, unbelievable. Apple, Amazon, Disney. If ISIS started a streaming service, you'd call your agent, wouldn't you?
All right, so it's very funny, but it's also true. And obviously, you hear all the time sweatshops in China, Apple. Like, this has been known for a long time, but there are a lot of unethical things that have been known for a long time, like sexual harassment in Hollywood, that people eventually the movement gains enough traction and it topples the behemoth over on its head. And maybe that hasn't happened with Apple yet, but we get glimpses of that with different things, right? What happened with Volkswagen, how it was exposed that there was an entire emissions scandal where they were, you can look it up, there's a documentary, but basically like they were lying about their emission standards, and then there was a huge recall of Volkswagens. This was something a little more of a bump for something like Netflix, but even this summer there was a movement to cancel Netflix because they released a film that I know nothing about. All I know is that it was associated with pedophilia. It had pedophilic tendencies apparently. And I remember that week in the market, Netflix was doing really poorly. That was sometime around September, right? It was at $5.52. It dropped almost $100 a share. that week because of that. So those are little bumps, but those can eventually add up. Another thing I think of, like, even before I really knew about stocks, I just saw Chipotle all the time was having trouble with the neurovirus and their food causing foodborne illness. So, like, those are the types of things you have to think of, and you don't want to. You may be sailing on a company like Apple now or Netflix now, but you don't want to be caught with those sorts of issues in the future. And the flip side of this is the solution to these unethical issues could give birth to new industries, right? Like, if you ask people in the 80s, like, I have this amazing idea for a vegan restaurant, it's going to make so much money, they'd be like, what the hell is that? But that's one of the great things about capitalism, is that it can cure a lot of unethical issues in society by making them stylistic, right? Like Elon Musk designing a luxury vehicle so some of the biggest consumers in society start driving environmentally friendly vehicles, or convincing a bunch of rich people that it's trendy to eat vegan food. And now look at these companies we have that have huge futures in front of them: Beyond Meat, Tattooed Chef, Shake Shack, and BurgerFi, which are not vegan, but they incorporate humanely raised practices into their food. So those are things to think about. And so this is why this is a section that might be a lot bigger than it seems. The third thing is something very simple, and you just have to access your child self of, like, product value. What do you want in a product? Like, what do you use day to day? What would you be sad to see gone in society? That thing for me is YouTube. Obviously, I'm making this video on YouTube. I think YouTube is the modern digital philosophical cafes that they had in the 1920s in Europe. I don't need to go into it, but it's just an invaluable place. And I would be very sad to see YouTube go in society. So who owns YouTube? Google. And, so long as YouTube's around, Google has a massive stream of revenue coming in. Similarly, people felt that Bitcoin was very important to them. Decentralized currency, cryptocurrency. They said, hey, I want to stop dealing with banks. I want to stop dealing with institutions. I want to stop making my money susceptible to hacking, to fraud, to security issues. So Bitcoin became popular. Something like Netflix, people said, you know what, I'm tired of going out for movies. I'm tired of buying DVDs. Those are just a couple things that have real product value to society that maybe aren't necessary, but sometimes it's not the necessary things that are the most flourishing in the market. Like, if you think about it, airlines are incredibly necessary. Like, we need to fly places to get places, but they're not doing this so well this year in the stock market because people have said with the pandemic, airlines may be necessary, but as an emergency option. Whereas you don't always want something that's necessary. You want something that people can bring with them everywhere and that they can use anytime, not because they need to, but because they want to. So the last thing is diversified subsidiaries, diversified revenue streams. If this year has shown us anything, I want to know that if a business fails, it has a way to not go bankrupt. I want to know that it has other streams of revenue. And here are a list of companies and their subsidiaries and all the ways they can make money if one of them fails. The main example being Disney. Disney really took my attention this year because it had a lot of heat on it, like what it was going to do about Disney World, Disneyland, its theme parks, because obviously that's such a major source of its revenue. But something that really turned me on to it was that I felt the price was low because of all that fear about it, and the fact that they owned all these other companies. They had all these other streams of revenue, right? All these channels. They have Disney Plus with its own shows. They own Pixar, movie studios, 20th Century Television Networks, ABC, the freaking Marvel. Like, they own all the Marvel movies, everything Marvel does. Like, that's the biggest thing in Hollywood now. They own Hulu, they own ESPN, Sports, FX, Nat Geo. And then I knew that after the pandemic, those parks would come back and that people would find a way to go to them. So, I just think, like, when you own this many things, you have like just a lot of you have a lot of stilts to stand on. A similar thing I was talking about with Facebook. Facebook could have been very well antiquated now. It would just be some website that not as many people use. But what'd they do? They went and bought out their competition. They saw Instagram was becoming popular. They were smart. They bought it out. They said, hey, what's the future of gaming? They bought out Oculus VR. They saw, hey, people are using these little weird things to communicate to each other, GIFs. They bought out Giphy. They bought out WhatsApp. And often what these companies do is they don't only buy out their competition, but they also create their own version of it on their own site. So Facebook bought out WhatsApp Messenger. Facebook's like, hey, we should do Facebook Messenger. You could always message people on Facebook, but now they have a devoted Messenger app. Hey, Instagram does live streaming. We should do live streaming. We should have GIFs on our website. So so it's helpful to think about like what are going to be the monopolies, what are going to survive, and you can kind of go through the same bullet points with all of these companies that I've listed, right? Like Google said, hey, we want Google Maps to be the most impressive navigation system, but we see this company out of Israel coming out, Waze. Let's buy up Waze and just use their software for our Maps program. So here's what diversified subsidiaries and revenue streams can do is basically they buy out the competition. They provide a safety net. If Disney World fails, their other revenue streams provide them income, keeps them on their feet, prevents them from going bankrupt. They also become the industry monopoly and take over the world. Like I think the best example is Amazon. It's almost like a running joke that Amazon's going to take over the world, but it's also serious because of how much Amazon has the ability to buy up, how much within Amazon they spread their wings throughout the world. Like if you think about Amazon Video, Amazon Prime Delivery, their delivery service, their video streaming service, they have Whole Foods, they have their own bars, they have their own ways of buying things within Whole Foods. You can very well see Amazon buying the highways one day, like it's a bit hyperbolic, but those are the sorts of companies you want to get involved with long term. And also people might think, well, I want quick growth. I want to make a lot of money. These companies don't have a lot of room to budge. I mean, first of all, look at Tesla. Look how much it's budged. I mean, it's obviously a more volatile company, but look how crazy it's gone. But the other thing I want to say is because of all of the above, because it buys out competition and it's a monopoly in its industry, it's basically just like this tornado that's going to suck up any other competition, any other brand or software that it likes that comes in its view. So while you have people in the market going crazy about a company like Jumia, which has gone up, almost 10x, you might in the future have a company like Amazon buy Jumia, right? Because people say Jumia is the Amazon of Africa, and Amazon might say, no, they're not the Amazon of Africa. We're the Amazon of the world, so we're going to buy Jumia. You might have Facebook buy Jumia because Facebook has some sort of expanded internet program in Africa. So these are just the types of things to think about. And I think like if you really hit these four categories, you'll have a pretty good pick long term with whatever you take. I don't know if it comes across very clearly, but from this, I'm very bullish long term on Disney. I really like the amount Disney has going for it. But tell me what companies you like long term. And also, my next video is most likely going to be on, besides Disney, what is my next big long term play? It may or may not have been mentioned in this video, but based on all that I've given to you, please guess in the comments below what you think my next long-term play is going to be.